to Bedtime Stories with CrispySkates. And we are reading The Wind in the Willows, picking up where we left off last night. The wayfarer, as he reached him, saluted with a gesture of courtesy that had something foreign about it, hesitated a moment, and then, with a pleasant smile, turned from the track and sat down by his bedside, the cool herbage. He seemed tired, and the rat let him request unquestioned understanding something of what was in his thoughts, knowing too the value all the animals attach at the times to mere silent companionship. When the weary muscles slacken and the mind marks the time. The wayfarer was lean and keen-featured and somewhat bowed at the shoulders. His paws were thin and long. His eyes were much wrinkled at the corners, and he wore small gold earrings in his neatly set, well-shaped ears. His knitted jersey was of faded blue. His breeches, patched and stained, were based on a blue foundation, and his small belongings that he carried were tied up in a blue cotton handkerchief. When he rested a while, the stranger sighed, snuffed the air, and looked about him. What That was Clover, that warm whiff on the breeze, he remarked. And those cows we hear cropping the grass behind us, blowing softly between the mouthfuls. There's a sound of distant reapers and yonders rising in the blue line of cottage smoke against the woodlands. Hello. Aw, thank you so much. Thanks for being here, Ed. How's your night? Everything seems asleep and yet going on at the same time. It is goodly life that you lead, my friend. No doubt the best in the world, if only you are strong enough to lead it. Yes, it is the life. The only life to live, responded the water rat dreamily, and without his usual wholehearted conviction. I did not say that exactly, replied the stranger cautiously. But no doubt the best I've ever tried. And I know, and because I've tried it 6 months of it, and I know it's the best. Here I am, footsore and hungry, tramping away from it, tramping southward, following the old call back to the old life, the life which is mine and which will not let me go. Oh, hi, JS. Thank you so much for being here. Is this then yet another of them? Mused the rat. And where have you come from? He asked. He hardly dared to ask where he was bound for. He said to know the answer only too well. Nice little farm, he replied. Up along the direction he nodded northwards. Never mind about it. I had everything I could want. Everything I had, anything, any right to accept of life, and more. And here I am, glad to be here all the same, though glad to be here. So many miles further on the road, so many hours nearer to my heart's desire. Shining, his eyes held fast on the horizon, and he seemed to be listening for some sound that was wanting from that inland acreage, vocal as it was with the cheerful music of pasturage and farmyard. You are not one of us, said the water rat, nor yet a farmer, nor even should I judge of this country. Right, replied the stranger. I am a seafaring rat, I am, and the port I originally hail from Constantinople. Through I am sort of a foreigner there too. In a manner of speaking, you will have heard of Constantinople, friend, a fair city and an ancient and glorious one. And you may have heard too of Sigurd, the king of Norway, and how he sailed thither with 60 ships, and how his men rode up through the streets, all canopied in their honor, purple and gold, and how the emperor and empress came down. Let's turn the page here. Coriska, and very glad I was to feel free and fresh, the breeze of the sea spray in my face once more. But it isn't very hot and stuffy down in the hold, I think you call it, asked the water rat. The seafarer looked at him with a suspicion go a wink. I'm an old hand, he remarked with a much simplicity. The captain's cabin's good enough for me. It's a hard life, by all accounts, murmured the rat, sunk in deep thought. For the crew it is, replied the seafarer gravely, again with the ghost of a wink. From Koriska he went on. I made use of a ship that was taking wine to the mainland, and we made a liso in the evening, lay to hold up our wine casks and hove on them overboard, tied to one another long in a line. Then the crew took to the boats and rowed the shorewards, singing as they went, and drawing after them the long bobbing procession of casks, like a mile of porpoises. On the sands they had horses waiting, which dragged the casks up in street of the little town with a fine rush and a clatter and scramble. Then, when the last cask was in, we went and refreshed and rested, and sat late into the night, drinking with our friends. And in the next morning, I took a great olive wood for a spell and rest. Now I had done with islands for the time, and ports and shipping were plentiful, so I led a lazy life among the peasants, lying and watching with them work, or stretched high on the hillside with the blue Mediterranean far below me. And so at length, by busy, easy stages, and partly on foot, partly by sea, to Marcellus, and the meeting of old shipmates, where visiting of great ocean-bound vessels, and feasting once more. Talk of shellfish. Why, sometimes I dream of shellfish of Marcellus and wake up crying. That reminds me, said the polite water rat. You happened to mention that you were hungry, and I ought to have spoken earlier. Of course, you will stop and take your midday meal with me. My mole is close by. It is some time past noon, and you are very welcome to whatever it is there. Now I call that the kind and botherly of you, said the sea rat. I was indeed hungry when I sat down, and ever since I inadvertently happened to mention shellfish, my pangs have been extreme. But couldn't you fetch it along out here? I am none too fond of going under hatches, unless I'm obliged to. And then while we eat, I could tell you more concerning my voyages and the pleasant life I led. At least, it was very pleasant to me, and by your attention, I judge it commands itself to you. Whereas if we go indoors, it is 100 to 1 that I shall presently fall asleep. That is indeed an excellent suggestion, said the water rat, and hurried off home. There he got the luncheon basket and packed a simple meal in which, remembering the stranger's origin and preferences, he took care to include the yard of long French bread and sausage of which the garlic sang, some cheese which lay down and sang cried, and a long necked straw covered flask wherein lay bottle sunshine shed a garnered on far southern slopes. Thus laden, he returned with all the spread, and blushed for the pleasure of the old seaman's condiments of his taste and judgment, as together they unpacked the basket and laid out the contents on the grass by the roadside. The sea rat, as soon as his hunger somewhat assuaged, continued the history of his latest voyage, conducting his simple hearer from the port to port of Spain, landing him at Lisbon, Oporto, and Bordeaux, introducing him to the pleasant harbors of the Cornwall and Devon, and so on up the channel to that final quarry side where, landing after the winds, long contrary, storm driven, and weather beaten, he had caught the first magical hints of heraldings of another spring, and fired by these, he had spread a long tramp inland, hungry for the experiment of life on some quiet farmstead, very far from the weary beating of any sea. Spellbound and quivering with excitement, the water rat followed the adventure league by league, over the stormy bays, through the crowded roadsteads, across the harbor bars, on a racing tide, up the winding rivers that hid their busy little towns, round the sudden turn, and left him with a regretful sigh that planted at his dull inland farm, about which he desired to hear nothing. By this time their meal was over. The seafarer rushed and strengthened his voice more vibrant, his eye lit with a brightness that seemed caught from some faraway beacon, filled his glass with red glowing vintage of south, and said, leaning towards the water rat, compelled by his gaze, and held him, body and soul, while he talked. Those eyes were of changing form, streaked gray-green, of leaping northern seas, and the glass shone hot ruby that seemed the very heat of the south, beating for him who had the courage to respond to its pulsation. The twin lights, the shifting gray, the steadfast red, the mastered the water rat, held him bound, fascinated, powerless. The quiet world outside the rays receded far away and ceased to be, and then the talk of the wonderful talk flowed on, or it was it speech entirely, or did it pass as times into song, chanting of the sailor's ways, the dripping anchor, sonormous hums of the shrouds and tearing northeastern ballad. All right. everybody. I hope you have wonderful dreams. Thank you so much for tuning in. Until tomorrow night, keep it crispy. Peace out.